All right, so yes, as I was introduced, my name is Chris Hartjes. Our keynote today is called Being Grumpy for Fun and Profit. I hope you guys are as excited as I am, even though I'm not outwardly projecting that. I never get tired of going to conferences. I'm of the opinion if somebody wants me to come and talk, I'll sweet talk my wife into letting me go almost anywhere. So I'm very happy to be here. But of course, people are probably wondering, why did they pick me to do this talk? So I'll give you a little quick info about me if you don't know who I am. So I'm this weird blend of things. I'm a first-generation Canadian born to parents from Germany. I work for an American company. I'm in Belgium here giving a talk in English. So it's a very interesting combination of things. The company I work for provides content for large American cable TV companies, ISPs, telcos. I spend most of my time avoiding doing real work and instead concentrating on trying to solve really weird problems that we have. Stuff like our sites are cranking out too many cookies, trying to figure out how to move us from PHP 5.2, yes, I know, 5.2, to 5.4. So I spend a lot of time looking at existing systems, how to fix them, how to make them better. And for those who maybe follow me on Twitter, I am the grumpy programmer. And so I've been spending a lot of time building up the brand that represents being the grumpy programmer with an emphasis on, let's come with some good practices that make sense. Let's test the shit out of everything so we know that nothing's going to break. And I just keep hammering those messages home because a couple years ago I decided I really needed to find a way to stand out from the crowd to raise attention so I could start doing the things that I really wanted to do instead of just being another senior level coder somewhere. So I came up with the idea of being a grumpy programmer, okay? So, but part of this too is why do I do this stuff? Why do I spend all this time on Twitter and things like that? So I do this because I'm a big believer in community, in the PHP community and other programming communities, but PHP being the big one, that everyone gets raised up. The more work that people do to collaborate and improve things that we have, it's of a good benefit to everybody. And so I have my job because of my work that I've done with the PHP community. In fact, I think pretty much every job I've gotten since about 2005 is because of all the work I've put into being a member of the community, getting on social media, helping out people with stuff. So if you really are looking to give your career a boost and become more than just a coder and want to make a career out of it, you really need to get involved in the community, okay? But of course the big question is, am I really this grumpy? I know that every time I put a picture of myself up on Twitter, I get people saying, how come you're smiling in that picture? And so the truth is about all the stuff that I do online is that I play a cartoon character on Twitter, really, the grumpy programmer thing. I mean, I do have my grumpy moments when I see stuff that I'm not happy with, but I really could not stay employed if I acted in real life the way that I talk about on Twitter or other things. Because even my wife says to me all the time, how do you avoid getting fired? And I say to her, well, it's because I'm not really the way I am at work like I project on Twitter. So, having said that, I'm not always grumpy. What are some of the things that do make me happy, okay? So things that do make me happy is having good friends, okay? And I meet friends every time I go to a conference. So I meet old friends, ones I haven't seen for a number of years, and I always make new friends every time I go to a conference, which is good. But another thing that I really like is the sharing of stories, okay? You know, good stories, new stories. I like to hear new things about people. I also like to hear stories again, to hear, oh, I remember last time I was at some other conference and you told me this story about this thing, so they recount and I have a laugh, and I remember I was recounting a very interesting situation where I was supposed to speak at a conference and I made a joke about the conference on Twitter, and I got an email saying, we were going to take you, but we rejected you because you made this joke. So that's a good story to tell people to share with others. So sharing stories makes me happy, and also what makes me happy is helping people just get better at what they do and exposing them to different ideas, things that will definitely make an improvement in the way that you do work, okay? So now we're going to talk about some things that do actually make me grumpy, okay? So I am grumpy about isolation. Developers tend to be very tribal. You latch onto a technology, and you really learn that, and you start identifying yourself with that technology, okay? So people label themselves as PHP programmers, Java programmers, Rails programmers, whatever. So it's a very tribal thing. So people want to form an identity for themselves, but when they do that, you end up isolating yourself from what developers in other communities are doing. And sometimes you inadvertently end up isolating yourself from people who are in the same community as you and the good work that they're doing. So you miss out on opportunities to take ideas that people smarter than you have come up with, and then you can apply it to the tools that you use yourself. So many, I mean, PHP is really like an extend and embrace type of language. We're stealing concepts and ideas from other languages all the time and finding a way through a ridiculous amount of arguing on the internals list how to implement them in PHP, right? So that's a good thing. I think that purposely isolating yourself and rejecting other technologies because you don't use them is you're really doing yourself a disservice. But at the same time, being grumpy about things is not trolling. Now, I like a good troll like anybody does, to pick on people, make fun of people. But when you're grumpy like I am and you express your opinions about things that are bugging the shit out of you, it's not really trolling. You're trying to make people understand about things. And the big thing that I find is that I get upset at lessons not being remembered. Tech, of course, is very cyclical. You know, you can almost say that 1 year on the internet is like 10 in real life. So when I think about it, I've been writing code for web apps since 1998. So that means I'm like, what, 2,000 years old in internet years? So things move very fast. And because things move very fast, people forget. They forget the lessons of the past. I mean, you see this all the time. People that talk about don't reinvent the wheel, that code and idea reuse is really big. But people constantly forget that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, somebody else came up with a solution to this problem, but you didn't know about it because you were either isolated or you didn't believe in the solution. But you have to remember you have to remember the past. So, so when you see me talking about stuff on Twitter and on my blog and stuff, I'm not trying to troll people by pointing out the stuff that they're doing that I don't like. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make everyone a better developer. Because from my perspective, with a focus on testing, the less shitty code that I see, the easier my job is going to be. Because if I can get everybody writing tests and everybody doing things better, then there's way less, and then I have more time to make fun of people on Twitter rather than trying to write tests to fix people's code, right? So when we think about what actually makes up a grumpy programmer and how any of you could become as grumpy as I am, there's, I think, a few key factors that happen. So I typically find the grumpiest programmers are experienced ones, so they're ones who've been doing it for 7, 8, 9, 10 years. Maybe they went through the dot-com bubble and were bitter that they never got stock options and weren't able to cash out before it all went to shit. But they're experienced. But the big thing that I have found is that people who have kind of the same ideas that I have been burned by working for companies that had a lack of attention to details. And not just, every place you have the big picture and the small picture in any company where you work. The ones that have made me the most mad are the ones that would screw up the big picture stuff and screw up the little picture. So lack of attention to detail. You have to have it going at both ends, right? If you're paying attention to the big picture and the little picture at the code level, then I tend not to be so unhappy. So one of the lack of attention to details that I see that I think some people find non-intuitive is tech fetishism, right? I am not immune to this. I like the new and shiny in tech. I don't know, almost like on a regular lunar cycle, I piss and moan on Twitter about why am I still using PHP after all these years? Couldn't I be doing something else? Should I be doing something else? But people are still willing to throw money at me to do PHP. So since I like money, I'll keep taking it to do PHP stuff, all the while trying to figure out ways to not do PHP stuff. But I think developers obsess about technology because they don't understand business. They don't understand how to turn their ideas into money, okay? And so I think the truth is, unless you are building tools to be specifically used by other developers, nobody who uses this thing that you're creating is going to care what you built it in. They're not, the users, I mean, when you think about it, if you look at Facebook, do you think the average Facebook user cares that it's built using PHP? No, they don't care. They just want it to work. So to people who aren't programmers, they don't understand why programmers continually bicker and argue about technology choices. They don't understand why Rails people crap all over PHP, although now I would say after what recently happened, they can't ever talk shit about PHP ever again, okay? So really, unless you're building something that you want other developers who like the same things as you, no one cares what you built it with, which is why PHP is still such an awesome tool, because you can literally, it is internet crazy glue. You can use it to glue all sorts of stuff together and create something really usable in a short period of time. And when it comes to business, especially now where people are expecting the pace to pick up, it's very important to have a set of tools that allow you to really quickly create something. So what you really need to concentrate on, instead of saying I'm a PHP developer and obsessing over what technologies are being used to build your favorite site, you really should just be saying I want to use the right set of tools to fit the job that I'm trying to do, not fit the job. You fit the tools to the job, not the job to the tools. Okay. Because when you're deciding all these things, you have this constant battle of, and I made up this word, optimists versus grumpimists, right? I really feel that any successful technology project has people who are like this on it, okay? Because what you need are the optimists. The optimists are the one that come up with a really good idea and say, hey, you know what would be awesome if I could have an extension to the C library and add it into PHP, we do all this stuff. And then, so the optimists are the ones that are great at figuring out what you're going to work on. And then a grumpimist like me comes along and says, well, here's all the reasons why your idea is shit and why it's going to take us forever to figure it out. So it provides a counterbalance between really crazy ideas on how to build something and the actual realities of getting it to work. Because being a big info product and book self-promoter, I understand very much about the idea that people think ideas have great power. Ideas are nothing. Everyone has ideas. What matters is whether you can execute on that idea and turn your idea into something that you can, and I know I obsess about this, but into money, to get people to pay you to do the things that you want to do. Because to me, there's nothing worse than working in a job that you hate. My wife works in jobs that she hates, and so she's bitter because I like my job. So it's a constant struggle of making sure that you're always trying to do what you like, okay? So I'm going to talk about something now about what I mean when I talk about an optimistic developer. So Node.js as a technology I would consider optimistic. The guy who invented Node.js was building websites in PHP. And he found that the types of web applications he wanted to build, they weren't possible with PHP. The things that he, in his mind, how he wanted to build it, didn't work. He's like, he kept thinking, why is this so complicated? Why can't I get it to do the things that I want to do? So he had the optimistic idea that I'm sure that if I take some time and evaluate a bunch of technologies, I'll figure out something that will let me do what it is that I want to do. So that's the optimistic side of things. So he created Node.js, okay? I think Node is a very interesting piece of technology. I think it represents it introduced a very different model of programming to developers in all sorts of different languages. So in that case, whether you like Node or not, I don't think you can argue that it's made a difference in the way that people approach things now. So you have the optimist goes and creates Node, and then once Node got usable, then you got grumpy people like me that came along to fill in the gaps and say, it's missing this, it's missing that, we need to optimize this thing. So you had the details-oriented people come in and fix all the stuff that the pie-in-the-sky optimist came up with. So that's the reason why I really feel that any successful project has a combination of grumpy people working on it to show you all the stuff that you fucked up, and then optimistic people to come up with the next idea. So that way, those projects that have the ability to do that, you get to appeal to the grumpy people who want to tinker around with things and make sure it's perfect, and then the optimistic people who want the freedom to try to do new stuff. But the problem with optimists is that they usually seem to forget the past. These are the people who ignore the line of thinking that it's been invented already, don't repeat yourself, check and see if somebody else has ever done this, because, you know, as programmers, ego interferes a lot. And people want to create things to have a legacy, so they can turn around and show people. It's a combination of ego and bragging and all this other stuff to say, hey, look at this really cool thing that I built. But you see so many people they have a problem and they don't do enough digging to see if there's an actual solution. And this could even be a solution, something as simple as someone in a different language implemented something similar to this. But this gets back to my tribalism comment from before that. If you are so insular and you only want to use solutions already existing in your tools of choice, you're going to miss out. So optimists these are the people that say, oh, well, you know, my favorite phrase that just lets me know that I'm in for a real problem is when someone asks me to do something, they say, well, how tough could it be? And I'm like, I could spend all day telling them how tough it could be. But it's the idea of getting people to understand that, you know, you have to, when you have an idea, you have to say, has anyone ever done this before? If no one has done this before, then you know you maybe be onto something. Because I'm a firm believer that if you have a really good idea, and if it's really, really good, no one will ever believe you that it's going to be any good, and you just have to prove it to them, okay? So some other things that I found about when you decide to be grumpy about things, that grumpiness is a real-time technology, because especially with the help of social media, when I have any sort of problem, I can tweet, I can say, I'm trying to do this thing, why the fuck won't this work? And who here knows how to fix this problem? So I get to leverage I get to outsource my optimism by getting other people to tell me how to fix my particular problem. So in that way, it allows me to have my own sort of problem-solving team. That I can get grumpy about something and complain about it, and almost inevitably, within an hour or so, someone on social media will tell me, here's how you fix your problem. And I'm like, awesome, that's an hour that I spent playing video games on my computer instead of solving the problem. Okay? But in combination with that, because you're upset with so many things all the time, grumpiness forces you to ask questions, right? You start looking at things, you're like, okay, I have this stack for my app and I'm using all these things, like, why am I using all these things? Is there a better way that I could do this? Like a good example is where I work, I've been appointed the cookie czar, right? Because we have all these problems with cookies. We have, right now in our code base, I took a look and we're creating no less than 117 different cookies. Yeah, you laughed, that's right. Which is a problem. So not only do we have on some sites where we're actually loading so many cookies that other cookies are being dropped and the application is behaving extremely weirdly, we also have problems where we're actually running up against the limit of the size of the headers because we have so much stuff. Okay? So I've started asking questions at work about why is it this way? And I get grumpier and grumpier because I cannot get a straight answer out of anybody about how it ended up this way. So one of the things I have to do is I get to be the guy that asks the awkward questions about why are we trying to jam 3.5K worth of stuff into a cookie when there's probably better ways to do it. I know somebody told me if you have more than 2 cookies, you're probably doing it wrong. I don't know if I can necessarily agree with that, but I have to be like, okay, if we're using more than 20 cookies, maybe we're doing something wrong. Okay? So grumpiness, remember, when you're grumpy, you're asking lots of questions because you want to justify the time that you're going to be spending trying to fix all these things. But the thing is, all this complaining doesn't mean that you're not interested in stopping progress. I'm not grumpy because I love working on PHP 5.2. Whatever the fuck it is on our machines, and that I don't want to change. I have my favorite libraries, I have my favorite frameworks. No. Those are just things I'm being forced to use because they came along before I was there. So I'm not interested in stopping progress. I'm interested in integrating new things. Me personally, I'm a big believer in always using the most recent stable version of whatever it is that you're using. Because the longer you wait to upgrade, then you end up with the pain of me having to point out to my boss that, you know that version of PHP that we're using? It's actually older than my daughter, who's 8, okay? You don't stop progress. You look at it and say, there's a reason why new stable releases of PHP come out, and I tell them, people always ask me, why are you so gung-ho to always use the latest version? Because chances are, they fixed a bug that's bugging us, they've made it work a little bit faster, and now there's more options, especially making the really big leap from 5.2 to 5.4. There are lots of parts of a 5.2 code base that just go away if we can do things like anonymous closures and all those wonderful things, so our code looks more like JavaScript, right? Just doing some async stuff makes it easier. Just the code will look better, and we'll have less code to maintain, and less code to maintain means less tests to write, and less likely that we make a mistake. So being grumpy doesn't mean that you don't want anything to change. It just means you want things to keep moving forward, but at a reasonable pace. Okay? But also being grumpy, you share things. Okay? Because you find out very quickly, because you're asking questions all the time about everything that you're using, you're asking everything that you have to justify its existence. Okay? So grumpy developers are far more likely to share what works, but also more importantly, share what doesn't work. I'm never shy to tell people, I tried using that thing, it did not work. So I'm usually more interested in finding out what didn't work than what did. Because I can spend enough time figuring out how something does work. I would more like to be able to scratch a whole bunch of technologies off of a list when I'm evaluating them for a particular task, right? And by sharing things, by being really aggressive about sharing, you're also less likely to accept the limitations imposed on you by community tribalism. The idea that if by sharing things all the time, you get people to understand that you need to look outside. Like to find good ideas, you look outside of PHP and find out what some other language is doing something, and you just steal it. And if you have the skills to apply it directly to PHP, even better. But making people aware that, you know, this problem we're trying to have, the solution exists in this other language. Let's see if we can make it work with PHP. Okay? And also, this is the key thing too that I found, that being grumpy all the time builds your skills. By being so unhappy with all the stupid shit that you have to do all the time to fix all the problems that you don't like, you end up building a ridiculously wide skill set. There's a phrase called jack of all trades, master of none, that I really feel that way, that I am. I've done so much different stuff, that really, really broad skill set, but a really shallow one, because I will work on something and then I get so mad and pissed off at it that I just get it to work and then I move on to the next thing. So no sticking around for 6-7 years at some place, understanding an application from the inside out. I'll get mad and I'm just going to leave after a couple of years because I just don't want to deal with that stuff anymore. So I think that you build these skills. So I talk about stuff and then I end up blogging as a way to get my ideas across, and then my blogging develops my skills as for writing and for giving presentations, and then it in turn leads me to do screencasts and to write books. So by being grumpy about something, it starts off this whole chain of events that helps me end up with an incredibly well-rounded skill set where I can do more than just a developer. I can stand up in front of a crowd of about 300 people and not totally panic when I talk about something. Okay? But also, grumpiness holds grudges. Okay? And by this, what I mean is that by being grumpy, you will remember previous attempts to solve certain problems. You'll remember the last time you tried to do master-slave replication and how you were lied to about how it was fast and redundant. I mean, I remember a place I worked, we were doing so much traffic with MySQL that our slaves were 45 minutes behind the master. So you can imagine on discovering that you've been lied to about replication. So that's a grudge I hold against replication, by the way. So I think by remembering the stuff that didn't work, it gives you a much better understanding of when you're building an application, the parts of the application that are really likely to be a pain in the ass, where you're not being optimistic that, oh, everything's going to work and it's going to be perfect. You remember, no, I remember last time we tried to do one of these things. This particular part was a pain. Let's see if we have a better solution in place now. And also, in that line, because I talk about stuff that sucks, grumpiness rejects tools that suck, okay? I'm the type of guy that prefers to work with my tools and not fight them. So I'm not the type of person whose laptop crashes in weird and mysterious ways. I'm not the type of person that pisses and moans about my editor not doing exactly, I mean, I use the best editor ever in Vim. Why would I complain about that tool? Yes, Vim. So I make it a point to not fight. I use a tool, and if I have to fight with it, I'm going to get rid of it. I don't care what benefit I get out of it. If it makes me struggle to use it, I'm not interested, because I want to build stuff. I want to get stuff done, right? So when you start refusing to fight the tools that you use, you will become much more willing to explore alternatives to find out if this other library is a better fit for your mental model of the problem you're trying to solve. So when you're grumpy, you reject tools that suck. But the surprising thing is that grumpiness builds careers, right? If I were a more optimistic person and willing to put up with more bullshit, I wouldn't have worked so hard. I wouldn't have tried to spend so much time to learn how to do everything that was bugging me. So that's how you end up with a really well-rounded skill set. The people that I know that I admire who do really awesome things as a programmer, they have a really wide skill set. They have to be, in order to solve certain types of problems, you have to, these days it's not enough to just be a programmer. You have to be a programmer, you have to be a sysadmin, you have to understand how to deploy your stuff. I mean, there's a ridiculous if I were to sit down and write down all the things that I need to know in order to do my job, you quickly realize that you've become way more than just a programmer, that you're doing way more than just PHP code. There's a ridiculous amount of skills that you need to learn and master in order to be able to pull off some really interesting things. So being grumpy, you develop tons of skills, and it helps build your career. But surprisingly, you would think that people ignore you because you're grumpy. No, they don't ignore you at all. They laugh at you, and then they follow you on Twitter, and then they buy your books, and they buy your videos, and they buy your screencasts, right? So you make friends by being entertaining, right, and providing, and at the same time by being funny, you're trying to teach them something as well. I have little kids, 2 girls, ages 13 and 8, almost 8, and they tell me all the time that I'm weird. Like, Daddy, you're so weird. I'm like, I know, right? Isn't that good? I said, you'll appreciate this when you're older. I said, I could be a conventional father and just, yell at you to be quiet and send you to your room every single time you're doing something that bugs you. But no, I try to use humor and show them that you can be upset about something, but I think it's far more important to tell people why you're upset about something and show them what you like to get fixed, because again, I have friends who are optimists and will go solve all these problems while I'm off on Twitter, okay? So really when this comes to that, grumpiness, the result of grumpiness stands before you. By being grumpy, I built up a career to the point where I got invited to fly across the Atlantic and give a keynote to a room full of really interested people who are being forced to listen to me. This is awesome. It's awesome, right? So what I have found is that as a computer programmer, there's always stuff going on that I don't like. There's always technologies that are doing things ways that I disagree with. So as long as my fellow developers keep doing stuff that makes me grumpy, I will have lots to say to you guys. So because the truth is you need me, okay? But I mean not me personally, but you need people like me, grumpy people who aren't willing to settle with the way things are, who are willing to say, no, I don't like this, no, your idea sucks, and here's how I want to fix it. You need people like that because, believe it or not, it's the grumpy people on almost every project who work to put words and ideas around the really sucky stuff that you find, okay? So you need people like me to point out to you the stuff that needs to be fixed. And I find that grumpiness is future-proof. And what I mean by future-proof is that by having the approach of being grumpy about the things that you have to work on, you learn to be suspicious of tech and tools that remind you of promises made in the past that they didn't deliver. So I'm going to digress a little bit to talk about something, about what I call the grim webhook future that faces us. I don't know how many science fiction fans there are here. I'm big on science fiction. When I'm not reading technical books, I read sci-fi. So a sci-fi author came up with this idea that he called the grim meat hook future. It was the idea that you could end up with a society where the people who have access to technology build walls around themselves, and then you have competing ideologies that end up using the rest of the world as a battlefield. So you could kind of argue, and I don't want to get political, but you could kind of argue that the wars in the Middle East are a perfect example of this. You have two sides that are building walls, or you can even say back to the Cold War with the US against the old Soviet Union. They erected walls of technology designed to protect themselves, and then they used the rest of the world that didn't have access to the same technology as a battleground to fight their war. Wars all over the place, right? So the idea occurred to me that we're kind of moving towards that in technology. So what I call the grim webhook future. So what do I mean when I talk about this, okay? So for me, the big thing that signified that we're moving towards this thing that I call the grim webhook future is the rise of virtual machines as, not as a substitute for Skynet, but more like just the idea that people can now outsource their infrastructure. You don't necessarily have to own all the hardware in order to do something. So what we have now is that more and more code is moving. You have more and more code moving from the server side to the client side, so the rise of JavaScript in applications. So you have everything's moving client side, plus now you have things that are being moved to virtual machines. And so now you have the asynchronous nature of client side. The asynchronous nature of client side code in JavaScript is now driving decisions on how you write things on the server side. It's the idea that when we talk about mobile first, what we're really meaning is now is API first, because you want to set things up that the mobile app talks to some sort of back end, and then the entire application is based on talking to the back end. So that represents a really different paradigm from when I first got into web programming in the late 1990s. Yes, I'm old. So what happens now is that you end up with this situation where people who are not used to doing asynchronous code are now being forced to do asynchronous code in order to fit what the cool kids are telling them is the future. So you end up with applications and code that make good old spaghetti PHP look like it's totally organized, right? right? You look especially at the JavaScript side of things, how you can get into what they call callback hell, where you're not careful, where asynchronous code that is several layers deep, and you're having to try to figure out where did this callback go, or what is even happening deep inside this code. So that part of the future with things moving to the client side creates lots of confusion because some of the tools aren't friendly and they don't have a proper model applied to them that most programmers who are like old timers like me can understand. But I really think that the grim webhook future has made people stupid, okay? And I say that because there's three things, right? Virtual environments, they do not magically work and scale, despite what companies that are selling cloud services might try to tell you. It's not automatic scaling. You have to work at it. You have to build your application in such a way that when you run into trouble, you can add another front end. You can add another node to your cluster or whatever. It's not automatic, okay? But the trade-off with the ability to do virtual machines is usually that I/O sucks in a virtual environment. So if you're running your stuff up on Amazon, you better not have something that requires really fast throughput because you're just not going to get it because there's too many layers of indirection between you and the actual hardware, okay? So that's why I tell people one of the lessons of the grim webhook future should be you need to own your scalability and own your stability. I mean, how many, a large percentage of the internet just explodes into cries and whining every time Amazon is down. And the reason is that people haven't considered what to do when the magical scaling tool decides to no longer work. And you know, and the grim webhook future raises exceptions. A little programmer joke. It raises exceptions because now you have to really build your application differently, right? Developers will have to relearn client-server architecture, right? Developers will have to learn new patterns of mobile and touch-driven interfaces. I mean, phones like this, devices like this are the future. I mean, they're selling way more of these than they are desktop PCs or even laptops. So the sheer volume of devices means that if you want a successful application, you're going to have to understand that it's no longer somebody sitting in front of a computer. They could be accessing via a wide variety of devices. But still people just think it's magic, that there's magical solutions with a little dash HTML5 and some CSS, everything's going to look perfect on mobile. And we all know that's bullshit, right? But the interesting thing is that I find that the grim webhook future, it reduces barriers. I think that right now, when I run a conference called True North PHP up in Canada, and we had the keynote speaker, this guy Reg Braithwaite, who's a Ruby, JavaScript, and CoffeeScript guy, and he's even older than I am. He's like 50, which is like Methuselah in programming, right? Practically immortal if you've survived that long. And he talked about how he thought that, he said that innovation is a lottery, right? That there's lottery tickets being handed out these days to people to try to build something that will generate a serious amount of money. And he felt that PHP simply offered more tickets. That the nature of PHP being so easy to pick up and a ridiculous amount of information, both good and bad, available online to figure out how to build almost anything in PHP, that was giving people more opportunities to succeed using PHP, as opposed to other languages where there's more structure and the barrier to creating something is much higher. So what I think is that I think these days it's easier than ever to create something simple, simply because of virtual machines and all that stuff. It's very easy to create something simple. But at the same time, I think it's raised the overall skill level required to do anything, because I think now it's never been harder to do something large scale and complicated, because the goalposts have moved by which we judge how things work now. Lots of people say, look at Facebook and say, well, that's easy. I could have come up with that. It's like, well, you may have been able to come up with the idea, but the chances of you, the individual programmer, being able to write a ridiculously scalable, high-traffic system like what Facebook has, your chances are, what, I don't know, nil of making that work. So I think that the idea that we now have the ability to create really distributed architectures means that there's a whole new set of skills you need to master in order to actually just build something that works that way. So again, I think it's easier than ever to build something simple, but tougher than ever to build something complicated, because now there's way more moving parts to think about. But this future is exciting for grumpy developers like me, because there's lots of shit to pick on now. There's lots of stuff to point out to people about why your incredibly optimistic idea is no longer going to work, right? And the real neat thing is that so many new problems are just old problems that have now moved around in your stack. Some of these problems have moved from the server side to the client side. Now some of the problems about how do we, how do we actually build end-tier applications? People had forgotten how to do that, and now because they don't pay attention to the past, they don't realize they're just simply reinventing things that other developers had figured out in the, I don't know, 1970s and 1980s in a non-web environment. A lot of those ideas can carry over into the web side of things. So I think that the grim webhook futures, you have so many opportunities to learn new things. Okay, I'm getting the stink eye, so I got to hurry up. So the grim webhook future is grumpy because there are so many opportunities for you to question what's going on and figure out the best ways to accomplish specific tasks. Okay, but I remain grumpy so that all of you can benefit from my experiences, and so I get to benefit from your optimism because I can say, I don't like this, how do I fix this? Someone can tell me how to fix that problem, and now we've established a relationship, however tenuous it may be, between people saying that there are people who want to know how to do these things, and then you know who to start asking about how to solve specific problems, okay? So, like I said, I get to benefit from your optimism so we can all work together to make the web suck a little bit less every day. So, since I have a chance to talk about myself a little bit, if you want to, I have several books. I have a book on building PHP applications to make them more testable. You can come talk to me. I'm not here to promote the book, but you can come talk to me afterwards. I do podcasts. There's a podcast called Dev Hell that I do with my friend Ed Finkler, a Funkatron on Twitter, if you follow him, where Ed and I, we've done 27 times. We've sat down and talked to each other over Skype about whatever was bugging us about technology. We cover a whole bunch of different things. I've had a lot of fun doing it, so I highly recommend you check that out. When you see me here at the conference, ask me questions. You've tracked me down on Twitter. I'm Grumpy Programmer without the U. I read every tweet that I get. I don't always answer them. I read every email that I get. I don't always answer them. But I am more than happy. I really feel that there's no question too dumb to ask, but there is such a thing as a stupid answer to a question. So I always love questions. And finally, if this is your first time that you've ever been to a conference, and this is about the, I want to say the 15th conference I've been to, don't let this be the last time that you go to a conference. These conferences are about more than just learning new things. It's about meeting people who feel the same way that you do about wanting to build things. And they all have the same desire to get better. I attend lots of talks too because there's always something new that I can learn, and it's an opportunity to network and meet people who do the same things that I do. And I've built my career by going to conferences and networking and meeting people who are doing stuff that I want to do. And so, and also a reminder that as a conference organizer that none of this happens without you guys. The conference is no good if nobody comes, right? Nobody wants to stand up here and speak to an empty room of people. So I would say thank you very much for showing up and making it worthwhile for the speakers. The speakers do this because we enjoy talking about it, but there's nothing more discouraging than talking about a topic and there's nobody in the audience. So enjoy the conference and thank you very much.